The Iranian regime is on the brink of collapse. For weeks, protests have swept through Tehran, turning the streets into battle zones, and the death toll is rising. It's one of the most intense uprisings the country has seen since 1979. But what's happening in Iran is only the beginning of a much larger crisis, one that's shaking China to its core. At first glance, these two stories might seem completely unrelated, but the truth is they're more connected than you can imagine. You see, for the last 20 years, China believed it had outsmarted the West by securing discounted energy supplies from the world's most sanctioned regimes. With deals in places like Iran and Venezuela, China's economy was powered by cheap oil, an advantage no one else could touch. But what happens when that strategy finally catches up with them? The answer is simple: a crisis in the making. Because while China thought it had locked in a steady supply of energy, the truth is they've tied themselves to instability. And right now, that instability is catching up with them fast. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did China get into this mess? The answer is a story of ambition, strategy, and a huge gamble. For decades, China's rapid rise has been fueled by oil, an energy lifeline without which the country's factories, infrastructure, and growing cities would grind to a halt. China consumes more oil than any country in the world, except for the United States. To keep its economy running smoothly, it relies on over 10 million barrels of oil every single day. But there's a problem. That oil is a ticking time bomb. When oil flows easily, China's economy hums. But when it slows or stops, everything else does too. Factories halt, transport tightens, and costs skyrocket. It's a delicate balance, and China's solution was simple: buy more oil than anyone else, but pay less. And that's exactly what they did. But instead of competing for oil on open markets, China made a deal with some of the world's most isolated, sanctioned regimes: Iran, Venezuela, and others. They were the buyer of last resort. Cheap oil at a discount, and with zero questions asked. For years, this strategy worked. But now that oil is no longer just cheap, it's fragile. And as the Iranian regime teeters on the brink of collapse, China's energy lifeline is beginning to unravel. The very countries China relied on are now facing instability, and every day the risk grows. This is where the real trouble begins. For years, China's oil strategy looked bulletproof: buy from the most sanctioned, most isolated nations, and profit from their discounted energy. But now, the cracks are starting to show. In 2026, the situation took a sharp turn. With the United States capturing Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro and unrest growing in Iran, China's lifelines are facing catastrophic disruption. You see, it's not just about oil anymore. It's about what happens when your energy partners start falling apart and you have no control over it. Take Iran, for example, China's largest oil supplier. Over the years, China has bought billions of barrels of Iranian crude at a price no one else would touch. And when the protests erupted, Beijing didn't just risk losing oil, it risked losing access to an entire system it had built. And that's where the danger lies. Chinese refineries are now so dependent on Iranian crude that any disruption could bring their entire system to its knees. If those shipments stop, if the oil becomes too unstable, the consequences for China's economy would be immediate and devastating. Now, let's look at how quickly this situation escalates. When protests first began in Iran, it seemed like another round of unrest, one that would eventually settle. But this time it's different. Iran's oil industry is already fragile, and every day the protests grow, the more vulnerable China becomes. Think back to the past. Iran's oil system has been a ticking time bomb for years. The country has been battling sanctions, a collapsing economy, and political instability. But for China, this instability has been hidden behind the curtain of cheap oil. Now that curtain is starting to tear. China's dependence on Iranian oil was always risky, but it seemed like a gamble worth taking. However, as protests spread, the risk isn't just about oil shortages, it's about everything connected to those shipments. Iran's refineries could stop producing, pipelines could get damaged, or transport strikes could halt oil tankers at the ports. The truth is, this instability was always part of the deal. And now, as the Iranian government fights for survival, China is facing the consequences of its long-term bet. What was once an efficient and cost-saving deal is quickly becoming a game of high-stakes risk management. But it gets worse. While China's energy planners are sweating over the instability in Iran, they're also facing a problem in Venezuela. For years, Venezuela's crude oil was a crucial piece of China's strategy. The deals were simple. Venezuela would provide cheap, heavy crude, and China would give financial support in exchange. But now, just like Iran, Venezuela is becoming a ticking time bomb for China's oil supply. In January 2026, Venezuela's political chaos reached a new level. With Maduro gone, the country is spiraling into even deeper instability. Beijing has billions tied up in Venezuela, but now those investments are looking increasingly risky. The same supply that once seemed like a cheap bargain is now being severed almost overnight. This isn't just about oil shipments slowing down. It's about China losing leverage. What once seemed like a smart move to secure cheap energy is now exposing China to even more risk. With Venezuela's leadership in disarray and the country at the mercy of U.S. political pressure, Beijing is about to lose control of its most crucial energy lifeline in Latin America. And this is where things spiral out of control. In the span of just a few weeks, China's energy web has gone from a strategic advantage to a nightmare. Iran is unstable, Venezuela is on the brink of collapse, and now China is stuck, scrambling for replacements. It's not just the oil that's the problem, it's the chain reaction that's starting to unfold. The small refineries in Shandong, known as teapots, are already feeling the pressure. These plants survive on razor-thin margins, relying on cheap, heavy crude from Venezuela and Iran. When those shipments get delayed, when they arrive in the wrong form, the whole system starts to wobble. And the worst part? China can't just fix this overnight. They can't magically turn to other suppliers. The infrastructure is built around these specific grades of oil. Refineries are tailored to process the very crude that's now in danger of disappearing. This isn't just a logistical problem, it's a financial disaster. Each delay, each hiccup in supply is a direct hit to China's economy, and it's just the beginning. What happens if this continues? Now, let's step back and think about how this affects you. This isn't just a geopolitical game between nations. It's something that touches all of us. When the energy supply chain breaks down, it's not just factories that feel it. It's ordinary people like you who will bear the consequences. In China, the cost of living is already on the rise. Inflation is creeping up. Fuel shortages could make transport more expensive, and everyday goods will cost more. The country's massive industrial complex will slow, meaning fewer jobs, higher prices, and a growing sense of uncertainty. And if this continues, it won't just be about China. The ripple effects will spread across the globe. As the world's second largest economy falters, it'll drag others down with it. Countries that rely on China's exports will start to feel the pressure. Global trade could slow to a crawl. If this feels familiar, this rising tension, this fear of economic collapse, let me know in the comments, because this story is far from over. But here's the real twist. This isn't just a momentary crisis. It's part of a much larger systemic problem. The energy instability China is facing isn't just about bad luck or bad timing. It's a result of a much deeper mechanism that's been building for years. For decades, China's energy strategy was built on one principle: control. By locking in cheap oil from sanctioned nations, China thought it could bypass the global system and create its own energy security. But in reality, this strategy is built on a house of cards. The countries China relied on, Iran, Venezuela, are now failing. And because China tied its entire economy to this precarious web, it's now exposed. This is the power of leverage and incentives at work. China used its financial muscle to secure these deals, but those deals came with hidden risks. They didn't just buy oil, they bought instability. And now that instability is creeping into the heart of their economy. This is the flaw in China's grand strategy. A system built on cheap oil and disregarded risks has now led to a massive vulnerability. The system that was supposed to make China stronger has actually made it weaker. So what's next for China? Well, there are two possible paths, and neither is a guaranteed win. First, China could double down on its existing strategy. It could try to patch things up with Iran, Venezuela, and other oil producers, hoping for stability in these unstable regions. But with every day that passes, this option becomes more dangerous. The risks are mounting: political unrest, sanctions, and a shrinking pool of reliable suppliers. The second path? China could change course entirely, finally shifting toward a more diversified and secure energy strategy. Instead of relying on unstable oil lifelines, China could start paying more for oil from countries that aren't on the brink of collapse. It could open up new supply routes, invest in renewable energy, and begin building a more stable, less risky energy future. But this shift would take time, money, and strategic shifts that Beijing has avoided for years. Right now, China is stuck in limbo. The next move could change everything, but it's unclear which direction the country will take. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this situation so dangerous. And here's the deeper insight. China's energy strategy wasn't just about securing oil. It was about control. The problem is control in a world like this is an illusion. The very system that was supposed to give China power is the same system that's now making it vulnerable. Beijing thought it had outsmarted the West, playing the long game. But in reality, they've boxed themselves in, relying on regimes that are unstable and unpredictable. Now, the price for that gamble is starting to show. This is the part where the story flips. China is facing a crisis of its own making. The world's second largest economy is now struggling with the very lifelines it built. The future looks uncertain, and the next moves China makes will determine whether it rises stronger or falls harder than ever. Want to see how this energy drama unfolds? Make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter of this story is already in motion, and you won't want to miss what comes next.